And welcome, everybody. This is Scott Winter with the Collaborative Commons. Want to just kind of a brief overview of what the Commons is for those of you who are new. But the Collaborative Commons is really a place and space where people who are doing collaborative work in the world come together, share, learn new ways and maybe old ways of bringing people together to collaborate more effectively. So tools, methods, resources, relationships, to really help us be better together. Today, I'm interviewing Barry Rellaford, who is a good friend of mine, colleague. I met Barry through my work with the Speed of Trust program, probably, 2008 now, I guess. 2008, I guess, is when that
came out. Actually, we met through my twin brother.
That's true. That's true. My brother Alan. Yep. But the story is I actually read the book Speed of Trust, and then the forward, Stephen M.R. Covey thanks Barry Rellaford, and then I reach out to Alan to say, hey, is that guy your brother? And he's all, yes, I've been wanting to connect you to. So we made that connection and then did a lot of work with you. So I'm excited to introduce the community to you. You've always been a good mentor, taught me a lot about working in groups. You've got a lot of experience. So I'd love to have you share with the group a little bit about who you are and what your background is. And like we always do, we'll just kind of riff on methods and tools that you use to bring out the best in people. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Barry.
Great. So I have an undergrad degree in organizational communications from Brigham Young University, master's from Ohio State in it's an MLHR. It's in the business school. They call it Masters of Labor and Human Resources. Now it's HRM. I always call it a Masters of Laughter and Humor Resources. But they didn't like that. They didn't like that much. But
right.
My work, I think, actually since high school has been. I just been fascinated with how to help people grow, and so many times that's in groups and helping people connect healthily. You know, how do we have relationships of trust and of genuine love and of goodness, and trying to help people be true to them, who they really are, and being true to one another. So it's, it's something I've worked at. So I've worked with, as you mentioned, with Franklin Covey. I acquired a company called Covey Link that I helped found with Stephen M.R. Covey, which we developed a Speed of Trust. Before that, I worked with Franklin Covey as a consultant, and before that was in corporate for about 11 years or so. Worked in two tech companies, CompuServe, which was the first big online services company, and also a company called Meditech, helped run HR and other stuff there. So again, I'll have some in organizational work. Is where I started my career. Did a lot of corporate kinds of things, but I've always had learned, read, written. And I have my own practice now called The Strength of 10. I've actually had that for about 16 or 17 years. And it comes from a quote by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who said, "My strength is as the strength of 10 because my heart is pure."
What is it? How did you make the leap from that quote to the work with your company, Strength of 10? Like what did that mean to you, and how does that kind of shape what you do?
Well, I'm not one, I don't know, the Barry Rellaford, I mean, the company's me. So it's not like, the Strength of 10, and it allows to bring other people in, but I actually like a brand or an idea more than just my name. And from a marketing standpoint, people say, oh, you just call it after yourself. It's like, yeah, but I don't know. It just doesn't. So for me, it's just this idea of, one of the things I learned working with Stephen M.R. was that I was really started off kind of as his coach. He called me up and said he was speaking at a conference and they wanted his slides. And I'm like, why are you calling me? Do you need help with PowerPoint? And he said, no, I don't have a speech. And I said, well, this conference you're speaking at, you got to have a topic. What's your topic? He said, it's called The Speed of Trust. And I said, oh, good title. He did not have slides. He did not have a speech, but what he did have was years of experience running his dad's company, and Stephen really is trust. When he defines trust as being, confidence based on character and competence, it's been very much my experience working with Stephen and being around him. So as I was thinking about my own practice and saying, what is it? And this is what I say to people. It's like, hey, if you're going to go share something with others, really just identify who you are, what you're about, and share that. That you don't have to be hard. It's not a hard thing to be authentic or to work on mastery of that. So I seek to have a pure heart. I seek to love people as who we are, invite people to be better. I think a lot of, just a little story may help. Not that I'm going to tell any stories, but There's this story that I think has some truth to it, because I haven't been to Firenze or to Florence, as we call it in English, in Italy, but Michelangelo, I've certainly seen his work up close. But in Florence, there's a statue of the prophet David, who's about to go fight Goliath. And it's this, I think it's about 8 feet tall. It shows David there, and he's got, he's just really buff, and he's going to go take on Goliath. And according to the stories, as you walk into the museum where this 8-foot tall statue is, there are these blocks of stone, and it's almost kind of this weird looking thing where there might be a foot sticking out of one, or an elbow or something. And according to the story that I'd heard, somebody asked Michelangelo at the time, how did you create this amazing representation of the human body? And Michelangelo was like, well, what do you mean? It's like, no, how did you do this? And he said, well, it was really quite simple. I just looked at the stone and I cut away everything that wasn't David. And that, for me, is a really profound, as who I want to be with people, who I want to be with myself, who I want to be with others. I believe that when we're young, we take on all kinds of almost a false self, and there's some psychology behind this as well. But that we develop these responses that say, "Yeah, I'm going to be this way in the world because I will get the approval, or I will not. I'm safe this way." And that many of those are not very. They may help protect us in childhood, but they don't serve us well as we age or mature as people. I think about that phrase you taught me, Scott, from I think your juvenile justice days. Don't feel. What's that one? Don't talk, don't feel. How's that go?
Oh, gosh. Wow, that's an old one. Don't talk, don't feel, don't. Gosh, I'm going to have to look back at my notes, man. That's something I've actually.
I know, not funny. We forget these things.
Wow. Yeah. It's about the dysfunctional families. It's don't talk, don't feel, don't trust. Yeah. Something along those lines.
Don't trust, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think about that as kids, and there's work that says that, I work with some folks, and this is some really great team dynamic stuff around Stephen Cartman's dreaded drama triangle. Yeah. And a friend of mine's written a book called 3 Vital Questions, and another book called The Power of TED. And TED stands for the empowerment dynamic. But we get in these different roles of
who's the author? Is that Richard?
His name it's David Emerald.
Okay.
His given name is David Womeldorff, but Womeldorff is such a mouthful that his writing name is David Emerald. He's based in Seattle and always loves kind of the emerald, the greenness of Seattle. But David's work is really profound. I'm certified in 3 Vital Questions. He's a great, it's great books, great methodology. And Cartman's work back in the 70s really looked at the drama aspect, which we have all experienced as humans. Right. That we either get into, we feel we're victims, which we are victims. Things happen to us that we don't deserve, we didn't take on, we didn't want, but they happen to us. But the choice that David looks at as victimization is things that happen to us, but victimhood is where we start to inhabit that role. And we start to gather more and more evidence that, hey, I'm powerless, I can't do anything. And as kids, we may develop that very early, where it's just like, hey, I'm just going to withdraw, or just not take this. Just if I'm quiet or whatever, stay out of this. Maybe I won't be a victim so much. Another role is an aggressive role called a persecutor, or I think about it as a victimizer. You don't have victims without a victimizer. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's our circumstances, our genes, whatever it may be. And that gets into a whole kind of collusive thing. And I've done a lot of work with Terry Warner and the Arbinger folks. Yeah,
the collusion diagram. Yeah, that's a big one. Exactly. Actually, I'm actually doing that. I talk about that in the, I've been doing this work with Yosef called The Sheet Between Us. And that's one of the tools I talk about. Yeah. And I also talk about the drama triangle, because we use it as a part of the flow cycle, because in flow, it goes struggle, release, flow, and recovery. And really what we're doing is in the struggle piece is introducing the drama triangle. Because again, everyone struggles, right? We cannot not struggle. And I think people oftentimes are beating themselves up because they are struggling. And so it's almost like teaching people how to struggle well. And the real shift has been, instead of when we talk about the drama triangle, it's how the environment is shaping your thinking. rather than the empowerment kind of space is getting your thinking to create the environment that you want. And so really making that a part of the new narrative to say, what am I choosing? And you said earlier about that feeling of being powerless. Again, from the neuroscience perspective, that sense of helplessness is one of the biggest causes of stress. And so getting people to feel where they have their power and the choices that they can make, which is, I mean, everything you're talking about, it falls right in line with the work that I've been doing over the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is the critics. So go back. I'm sorry, man. I mean, like I said, I love talking to you because you and I can
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
And just the third role there that I think takes it from some of the collusion. I studied with Terry Warner, and he talked about what's a mediated relationship is this idea of the rescuer or the enabler, as we often will talk about. And what happened, and this is one of the things I've read this, studied a bit about it. But one of the things David Womeldorff pointed out to me was that when the idea of the rescuers, they want to help. The intention is not a bad one, but they will tend to appease or be the peacemaker in a family. And they're trying to intervene between the persecutor, whatever it may be that's causing the victim to feel victimized. But the where it's not useful is that it basically is the message, whether spoken or implied to the victim is, hey, if I didn't intervene, you can solve this on your own. In other words, I still see you as one down.
Right.
And that really struck me because the one I struggle with most, I can inhabit all three, but it's rescuer. It's often like, oh, I want to help the world. I want to serve people, So it's a quick little thing on David's story. And I think it's just best to read and hear it from him. But he said that his first book, The Power of Ted, it's one of these parables, much like my book, A Slice of Trust, where there's a story that communicates the ideas. And in this, it starts off, this guy's walking along a beach, and his name's David, and as he's walking along, he's reflecting on his life. And what's happened in his life is he's lost his father. He's just gotten divorced because he's infertile. He can't have children. Well, that was David's life. This is all actually autobiographical, where he's sharing that. And he said, my life is kind of he's on the outside functioning. I think I may have known him through some of this when we first met many, many years ago. And he said, it's, you put on all the facade, the false face for people, but when it comes down to it, he's inside struggling. He said, so he's in therapy, he's talking to people, he gets introduced to the drama triangle. And he said, I was thinking about it. He says, I have this daily practice of meditation. And he said, and as I was reflecting one morning, I just said, what is the antidote to being a victim? And he said this thought just appeared in his mind, just bam. And it said one word, it was creator. It was like, that's really profound. And he had this feeling with it. It's like, wow, I'm a creator. I choose to be a creator rather than a victim. And he said he does coaching through Notre Dame and was doing some work there and going through an instrument. And he started sketching out the drama triangle for a client, and he was talking about this creator experience. And then he said, as I was sketching this out, if I remember this correctly, he said, other counterbalancing or anecdotal roles came up. He said, instead of being a persecutor, you can be a challenger. And the idea of a challenger is that you're challenging people's thinking. And because you see them as creators as well, not just you as a creator, but everybody's a creator, you're challenging their thinking or sometimes even issuing a challenge to them. And instead of being a rescuer, you can be a coach. And a lot about coaching is about questions and allowing the performer to really be who they are. So the whole 3 vital questions work is helping people get out of drama and getting into a more healthy dynamic.
So what are the questions?
First question is, what are you focused on? Which is, are you more problem-minded or are you more outcome-minded? Which, again, not new stuff,
right?
But very, very powerful question for each of us. And we can see this problem-mindedness. I see it in myself. It's like going, oh, I'm focused on what I don't want versus what I really do want.
Right. Which, again, going back to, in terms of motivation, the brain is going either towards or away and will spend more energy avoiding bad things happening than creating the things that they want, right? So, when we start blending the science with the social science, with the psychology, with the neurobiology, I mean, everything starts to really make sense. So that's one of my first questions, like, what are we focusing on? Where do we want to go? And in the flow science, we say flow follows focus, right? So it's one of those pieces where that's a critical question. I love it. What are we focused on, or what are you focused on? Because that could be both a question to an individual and a team. I think oftentimes too, the team there is a lot of confusion. They're not aligned around what to focus on. I'm focused on trying to get out of the meeting. I'm focusing on trying to get my promotion. I'm focused on, so there's no shared focus.
Or I'm gonna get even with you or whatever. That, I'm gonna be aggressive. The second question is, how are you relating? And that is the two dynamics here. So how are we relating? But are you relating from drama? Or are you relating from empowerment? And the third one is really, what's the next step? How will we act? What action will we take? Or will I take? What action will I take? And he uses, and as you can see, David's got some insight. To me, it's almost like Dr. Covey's work around the 7 habits. Dr. Covey did not create the principles behind them. He always said that. And it wasn't he was synthesizing. I think his brilliance was around being able to synthesize a lot of other material into the 7 habits and have them build on each other. And, that's where but you can look at the sources he went to and see, oh, I see you got that from there and there, and he kind of moved this. And I find all the good works that same kind of thing. So what David's done in the third question is to look at Robert Fritz's work about creating, which is not about creativity. It's really about how do you create. Robert Fritz has a book. His first big book was called The Path of Least Resistance. And it's this idea of kind of begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to get to and go stand in the future? Then take a realistic look at where you're at today, which is realistic, meaning you're not horribilizing, oh, everything's terrible, and you're not glamorizing, oh, everything's great. It's that you're realistic. You're in a sense realizing, like, yeah, this is what's going on. This is what's driving forces, restraining forces, whatever it may be. And then as you look at, okay, so this is where we want to be. This is where we are. What are the next steps? And allowing that creative tension to pull us into the future that we want, rather than drive or push. Again, as you and I, Scott, have worked together, David's work is not unique or new. What I love about it, though, is how it's packaged and how accessible it is. And it's a wonderful experience to lead people through. So
yeah, well, it's interesting because in the human element work that I do, they actually have 6 roles that are interspersed. But the victim, the persecutor, the challenger, or the persecutor, the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. But there's a couple other ones, and this is from Will Schutz's research, and he was like pioneering with fire theory and stuff. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I find when you talk about the rescuer, I sometimes see how the rescuer can easily fall into the victim pretty quickly too. It's like, I give all my time and I share it, and you don't give me any. It's like, there you go. So it's really an interesting dance, and from an energy perspective, a lot of the groups that I work with in facilitation, I will share that with them, because especially if they're in conflict, I got to sometimes be cautious, because I think the term victim has a lot of other meanings to it. And so I'm always kind of really careful about describing it in a way, like anytime you put yourself in a moment where you're complaining about something, you're putting yourself in that victim role. So yes, are there real victims of terrible things? Absolutely. Yes. The question is then the choices that you have to make. I mean, it's like Viktor Frankl, you can't control what people do to you, but you can control how you choose to respond. And it's the power of choice comes into the play as well. So all these questions that you ask are also choices. Am I focusing on something I want to move towards, or something to move away from? I love how you frame the question of how are you relating to it? And, am I coming at it from a drama perspective or an empowerment perspective? That's, one of my key insights this year has been, the choices that I make in terms of how I'm choosing what I take in, and I'm choosing how I process, and I choose how I express it. So those 3 inflection points are really powerful, especially if I'm up facilitating and someone says something that kind of stings. It's like, how am I hearing it? Am I hearing it from a victim perspective or from a curious perspective? It's like, and then where's that feeling coming from? And to your point earlier around, again, in the human element, we talk a lot about the strategies that we deploy. In our adulthood, we learn when we're really young, when we're triggered, because we're really trying to say, how do we reduce defensiveness, increase openness? And so one of the questions that we often pose within the radical collaboration work is, if I'm feeling something, I need to say something. A lot of people suppress what they're feeling, not knowing where it's coming from. And why people get defensive is they don't want to feel insignificant, they don't want to feel incompetent, and they don't want to feel not liked. And that's really the social drivers of the brain. So, or the need to feel, or the fear of being rejected, humiliated, or ignored, right? And those are potent feelings. And so in group meetings, for example, when someone's brainstorming and let's say, Barry, you are typically the idea guy, but all of a sudden some new person has an idea and they get a lot of recognition. You're like, well, I'm not feeling significant. So you might say, I mean, it's so subtle when you start dealing with these. The human dynamic of collaboration, I think, is the most fascinating part. And the work that I've been doing with the Flow Research Collective, or what I want to do is really talk about how do we use collaboration and collaboration methods and tools so that groups can get into group flow more quickly, because if you're in a flow state, you're more productive. Also, group flow is more powerful because that trust hormone oxytocin gets put into the neurochemistry in addition to the dopamine and all this norepinephrine. And so those are the other pieces around this, is like to name it to tame it, work with it, and have conversations where in meetings, instead of it being Barry and I we're going to talk offline because we're in conflict, we actually have the conversation in front of the team, so that we're teaching a skill set around how to work through their challenges. So I just love these questions. They're great. And I use all material that you talk about, but I didn't really know all the deep history behind it. So you're going to have to send me a lot of the books and the resources so we can let the community know where to go to get the background information on this stuff.
Absolutely. Will do. No, it's great stuff.
Yeah.
And they're great people. He and his wife, Donna is master coach, and again, it's great stuff. I highly recommend it to people.
So you got into the 3 vital questions, and that has shaped kind of the work that you do within the Strength of 10.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's how do I put? I
mean, you're an integrator. What I find about you,
exactly.
You take every. I mean, you're like me in a lot of ways. We're in a way translating. We're integrating it into our facilitation. But you have speed of trust, you have all your experience with Covey, you have the strength, you have the 3 vital questions and David Emerald's work. But you seem to pick up stuff and you integrate it very quickly into the way that you teach. And I'd be curious to know, what are some of the new things that you are doing that can maybe help the community learn about how to bring people together. So if you have anything, I know that
we talked about. Let me share a couple things, but before I do that, Scott, we may have talked about this before. Let's imagine you and I are magically transported to a room together. If there's mist around us and we're kind of standing looking at each other like, what? Where are we? What's happened here? And in the center of this room or this place is this, looks like a well or something like that, the top of a well. And it's all these stones are all stacked up together, maybe bricked together. But the top of it is, you can see there's water there. It's just smooth, but you see like this mist rising from it. And we're looking at this going like what? Where are we? What is this? And we see Stephen R. Covey walk up to it. And he looks down into this, and we hear him say, habits, effectiveness, principles. And he walks away. And we're like, what is this? And then we see Stephen M.R. Covey, his son, walk up, and he looks in the same well, and he goes, principles, trust. He walks off. Name a person. David Emerald, Womeldorff walks up, and he sees the thing. I call this the pool of principles. And to me, there are these. You talk about structure in the work. What underlies the dynamics? And to me, I'm just fascinated with this. Not just idea, but it's something I've seen way back into my childhood, or at least as a teen when I started journaling, of just a quest for kind of truth. What is real, particularly around people, about myself and about others. So all this stuff you talk about integrating, it's an ongoing search. It's just, and again, I see these different expressions, and there's great stuff from all of them. And I'm still working on my own understanding of who am I and how can I best serve in the world. And just so anyway, that's a metaphor that comes to mind. As you and I chatted about just briefly before we jumped on the Zoom here, I'm going to pull up a model that, and I can talk more about. Sorry, I'm going to jump over here, but this is something I've been playing with, and let me give a little background to it.
Okay.
About, a couple of years ago, I picked up an assignment through my church to help out with young single people in our area. So I have a I'm a lay minister in my church, and so I help a lot of young people in their decisions in life, and they're going to school, they're working, starting out in relationships, all kinds of stuff. So there's all kinds of things people are faced with, and I'm just there to help them sort through that, particularly on a spiritual level. Because of that, I stopped traveling as much as I had. As you know, you and I talk, be like, man, where are you today, dude?
Right.
And I've got a couple million miles on Delta. I've been all over the place and enjoyed a lot about that. But I just said, you know what, to be more available to these young people, I need to be home more here in Utah. So I started looking around for things to do. And one of the things that I thought about is, well, you know, I've always kind of wanted to teach at the university. And so I'll try that out. So I got on, I was accepted to be an adjunct professor in the business school at BYU, where I went to school. And they have me teaching ethics. Now, what happened when I started teaching is I got all these decks of slides and this curriculum, and they're basically saying, well, you know, have at it. And I got a textbook, and it's like, I am literally staying 1 to 2 assignments or classes ahead of the students and trying to make my way through it. But there's so many models, a lot of philosophy, other things that, and I'm one who is an integrator and wanting to help people have practical, simple things that they can apply under pressure. When the moment's there, what can you do to deal with this? And we do a lot of dilemma, which is basically a story that has not a right or wrong answer to it, but more of 2 rights or 2 wrongs. And how do you, and that's what's part of the dilemma, is like going, oh, that could be good, that could be good, or man, I really don't like any of these options. So this little framework you see here is one that I use both in my ecclesiastical responsibility, but I use a lot in training our students in it, and developed it just, again, it's an amalgamation of other things I've looked at. And it comes a bit from a quote that Dr. Covey gets. You know, people often say Stephen Covey said this. He said it, but he didn't create it. And he'd tell people. And it's this quote that says, between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space lies our freedom to choose our response. In our response lies all of our freedom and growth.
That's Viktor Frankl, actually.
It's actually not Viktor Frankl.
It's not. Well, it's in his book, The Man's Search for Meaning, then. It's even further than that.
It's not quite like that. No, so I've actually studied this, and there's this site called, I think it's called the Quote Investigator.
Right.
And they say typically it's Stephen Covey or Viktor Frankl. Frankl has the same concept. He too went to the pool of principles in a very difficult way and said, this is the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's response no matter what their circumstances are. And he talks about having more freedom than, he didn't have liberty, but he had freedom. He could choose his response, his captors couldn't. So the concept's in there. It's probably Rollo May, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not clear, but that's what the Quote Investigator says. It looks like Rollo May's work, maybe work. Covey read it, because Stephen Covey said he read it in a book when he was doing some research for some of his early work. He just couldn't find the book. So anyway, I've taken space to make it into an idea, and I use this a lot with groups, and I use it both personally. This is the thing I say to myself, but I work with groups, both in teams and organizations, as I work with these students, and saying, here's 5 things you can think about. And while they're kind of laid out as a linear thing, in reality they're dynamic. We're moving through these so quick, it's much more of almost like an atom. So the first one's to sense. And what I find is that, again, I'd love to chat with you more about the brain science behind this, because I'm learning more about brain science through this ethical neuroethics and things, but it's that we sense something is amiss. We sense, oh, I have a choice here. And I will often say to students, if you don't see 2 options, you don't have a choice. So one of the first things to do is just like, ooh, sense, hey, there's another way to look at this, or another approach here. And so the sense can be physical. It may just be like, oh, I'm starting to feel something like my guts starting to wind up, or wherever we feel stress, my face, wherever, we feel like, and depending on but there's a physical response, there's an emotional response where, just start to feel fearful or anxious or some other thing. There's mental response. Our thoughts start to race. And there could be a moral or spiritual response. It just doesn't feel right. Something feels off. And so, again, I'm teaching it kind of as this happens, then this. It's not, it's all happening so quickly, but I've kind of spread it out to help people see it. But I say to students, you got to sense this. So the second is to pause. And this is where, again, Scott, you know a lot more about the neuroscience than I do, but it's trying to keep your prefrontal cortex in charge and not going into the limbic system and the amygdala hijack, and being able to say, and so simple things like count to 10, think about it overnight if you have the time, taking 3 deep breaths, really deep breaths, take a drink of water. There's all kinds of things we can do that help buy time and help us, not just react in a way we may regret later. And fight, flight, freeze, or appease responses.
Right.
The third is to ask, and ask is really one of the ways to pause. And there's all kinds of questions people can ask, but I try to train people to say, it's great to have kind of a hip pocket question. You just pop out, and one that's just like, what's right here? Or what am I feeling? Or what do I really want? But having some preloaded questions like, boy, if you start feeling like, something's off, ask a question. And then depending on the amount of time you can create, you can go much deeper into analysis and,
Well, on that point around the question, because that's the other part related to the drama triangle, is the question that you asked there is, so what do you want? And that, again, it pulls people into their prefrontal cortex, unless, of course, they're overly aroused, because if you say it, they're pissed off, they're like, I want you to be dead. So it's
exactly. I want you to go away.
Exactly. Yeah. So it just really depends on how triggered they are in that S space. And again, what you're describing are really kind of a top down, we call it top down approach to dealing with that trigger, if you will, in the environment.
So these three I find are so interconnected. It's hard to, again, you can explain them this way, but in reality, you're into this, you're in the spa, I guess. But the C is, at some point, you got to make a choice. Choose your response and be deliberate about that. Just, mindfully, if it's ethically, if it's an ethical dilemma, saying, what's my choice? And this is the thing that I find very interesting. And again, I'm sharing, because a lot of the teaching I do of this is with students, but we'll say, when you graduate from university, even though you're in a good business school and all that, you're probably not going to be the chief executive or on the executive team going into a large organization. That shocks them a little bit. I'm teasing, but I say, you got to be able to engage stakeholders. And I said, I work with CEOs of quite significant organizations, large organizations, that even if you're a CEO and you think, I can tell everybody what to do, you've got a board you're often reporting into, you've got regulatory groups, you've got funders, there's all kinds of other stakeholders. You got to figure out, how do we engage them? How do we get on board? Particularly if the choice we're trying to get them on board with is one they're not going to be that, automatically supportive of, or just think, hey, Scott, all you got to ask me to do, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do. It's like, well, why do you want to do that?
Right.
So strategies to help people engage, and some of the stuff you can do preventively. If you have high trust relationships, if you are, consistent in your character and you're competent in your role, that's going to help when it comes to engaging people. But there's times where, if you're a whistleblower, I just heard one of the Theranos, the main whistleblower for Theranos speak last week on campus, and it's phenomenal. He's 24 years old, and he's getting all this pressure on that, and yet he's doing what he knows is right, but he's got to get stakeholders on board.
Well, his grandfather was on the board, if I recall. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it really tore up the family dynamics, and it sounds like his parents came to bat for him, but he pretty much, they dropped him like a rock. It was just, that took a lot of courage, for that guy.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And
amazing.
He's so much fun to have with our students, because he's 28, I think, Tyler Schultz. And his grandfather was very well known. George Schultz, who was served in the Nixon and Reagan administrations, very well known business person. And according to Tyler, he says, I think this might have been the most, the kind of the rock star of angel investors ever, because of several people put in $100 million. Individuals did this, not funds. They were individuals, very wealthy individuals who said, and I think they raised like $900 million, and I think at least $600 million of that came from 6 individuals type of thing.
Wow.
So this was a very, again, the power you're up against in terms of position, authority, reputation, and yet where he's saying, hey, there's the emperor has no clothes. This is wrong. So that's just kind of a thing. But I find this has influenced my thinking a lot. And when I'm facilitating a group and I start to notice myself, start to react to a comment, or just like you mentioned earlier around the thinking that we go through of, am I really hearing, or what am I processing that? What, or am I expressing that? These kind of choice points. I just say, Barry, got to create space. And as I did finals last semester, one of the things we did in our final was have them go through a dilemma and apply something from the course. And so many of them brought up this space model. And I don't know if they fully understood it or they'll be able to go through all the steps, and that's fine. It's more the idea that says, hey, when something happens to you, how do you create space to be able to give to other people the person that you really choose to be true.
Right. Well, again, there's a guy I interviewed a few months ago, Dan Radecki, and he talks about the brain's braking system, and that's what you're doing through this process. They talk about, this notion of it, like it's a fifth of a second between stimulus, right, and response. So your brain's picking up cues from its environment every fifth of a second, and then a half second in terms of making the decision. And there's a neuroscientist named, his name's eluding me right now.
I'll come back to you.
I'll think about it. He talks about, it'll probably pop in my head in a moment. He started this whole program where he says he's trying to teach people to that impulse control, that space between that fifth and a half a second is such a critical component. And so this is a great model to get them to think about, but that sensing or making sense of, a lot of times it has absolutely nothing to do with the other person. It's just how I'm perceiving what I think they said based upon these past experiences, So it's pretty, Evian Gordon is the neuroscientist's name. And he's got a really cool app. It has a bunch of different brain-based capacities. What's the name of his product there? It's good stuff, but he's done a lot of research working with prisoners, helping them do impulse control. He's got what's called the 1-2-4 model. So the one is the brain wants to feel safe more than anything else. If it doesn't feel safe, all bets are off, right? The 2 represents the conscious, non-conscious. So, we manage 11 million bits of information every second. Of that, maybe about 40 of it's consciously. And then the 4 represents, to your point, it's sensing, feeling. There's 2 other elements. I'll post it as well, and it eludes me. But he uses sensing and feeling separately. So sense is the body. It's like what I'm taking in, and then the feeling is how my body's processing it. And then I know the 4th element is something around impulse control, or I'll get those 4 to you. But it's good stuff because it really speaks to that essence. And that pause is, a lot of times it's breathing or finding a visual cue that you can kind of anchor to kind of do the pattern interrupt. Because there's a guy named Andrew, another neuroscientist out of Stanford, talks about that one of the biggest charges to our nervous system is to be confronted, right? So if I'm confronted with an idea or personality or whatever, it's a huge charge to the nervous system. And what we're finding is that we got to help people manage their nervous system, which is kind of the precursor to their emotional system. So it's really kind of a dance between the 2.
It's interesting, Scott. I'm on a board of a publishing association, and now and then people will reach out to me, ask me to read their manuscripts and see if I can help. And there was this person I met, she shared it with me at a conference, and I'm like, I'll get to it. But I did commit to read it. So this week I was actually reading it, and it's this horrific memoir. It starts off with, she's 15 years old living in Michigan, and she suspects that her father has killed and burned her mother's body, trying to burn down the house too. And she feels guilty because she had left her mom alone with her dad. And it's like, you're reading this like, wow. And she goes on and she tells a story about being raped. I mean, I'm just like going, I told her, I said, if I had not committed to read this book, I'm not sure I could have made it through. It was just so difficult. But as she goes through this, again, it's not this terrible, I'm a victim thing. It's really this amazing story account of how she's worked through this. But the thing you mentioned about the nervous system caught my attention because of some therapy that she went through. On one hand, I was thinking, how does she remember these experiences so vividly? 25, 30, maybe 30 years later. I'm trying to think how long it's been, but it's been decades. And yet she had, she's describing these things, at least the way she's able to write them up with the help of another writer, is making them, they're very vivid, the description. And she said, one is, I know she's probably on high alert through all this for years, but another was, she just talked about how we capture memory in our nervous system and throughout our bodies. And so I know I look at you as much more expert on this brain-based work than I am, but I just find it, fascinating as we're learning more about people and how we operate in this kind of hardware that we're working in, but also to kind of understand the software of, the thoughts and how to, and again, the more, a quick little quote from my twin brother, and I don't know if he originated this. We were talking on the phone one night when I was living in Ohio. He was in California, right next to you, and Paradise, and he said, Barry, the more you get to know yourself, the more you'll get to know me. And the more you get to know me, the more you'll get to know yourself. And at first I thought, oh, that probably applies to us as brothers or maybe as twins. But the more I've just thought and, lived in that thought has been, circles back, Scott, about when we're working with people in a team, we're trying to help a group to collaborate, truly labor together, to work and to accomplish something worthwhile together. The more I understand about myself and my responses and what it is to be a human in this world, and in many ways a more complicated world than earlier generations in terms of all the stimulus that's occurring, and to make peace with myself and to be true and authentic. Boy, in our role as facilitators, helpers, is trying to give to people somebody who is in the journey, who's in the struggle. And I think struggle is actually a really good word for it. So anyway, I just thought it just occurred to me as we were chatting.
As you're talking, it's like I was talking to a friend of mine. She does a lot of counseling for the firefighters from the Paradise area, up to the fire. And I was talking to her about, really learning how they cope with a lot of the things that they've experienced. Because, what she's found in some cases is that they'll do really well in one-on-one, but they don't want to come together and be vulnerable, right? And so, I was talking to her about kind of maybe working on a manuscript called The Struggle Well. Like, what are the strategies that people could go to so they can struggle well? Because I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago where when they were talking about how when people are struggling, they feel like they're broken, right? And then someone was sharing how the origins of the word sin means to miss the mark. So if I'm struggling, I must not be doing something right. I must not be living into some expectation that either I've set for myself or in a sense it's been set for me, or that there's a societal expectation of how I'm supposed to be and I'm living up to that mark. And it's fascinating what I'm finding. It's like, it's okay to struggle. We got to let people be okay with that. And I think it's part of the whole mental health. If you see the trends that are out there within mental health in the workplace, you're seeing high levels of accountability and low levels of empowerment or autonomy. And that's like one of the biggest struggles out there for a lot of people. And so helping people cope, I'm the mindfulness, the flow stuff, that's all coming into play here as a result of, I think, some of these trends. So this model
really
here is
powerful.
great.
And I see that, Scott, as well with these young people with anxiety and depression. We may be better as a society at diagnosing than we were earlier. I don't know, but I also just, this idea that, boredom is okay. Struggle is not only okay, it is desirable.
Yeah.
To seek, it's that, but again, and these expectations, again, they can weigh us down. I see it in myself where it's like, just being at peace with I like who I am and I'm good and I do worthwhile things, it's like, and not even evaluating who I am or value myself based on my accomplishments or my behavior, but just to be whole and to have this integrating thing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said. And I'd just be curious from the work that you have been doing in groups, what are you noticing? Over the years, since you started doing work with groups, and what are you noticing now because of some of these trends related to stress? And again, it's giving a sense of both individual and shared resiliency, but also creating a language around it. Because I know you do a lot of storytelling. So I'd just be curious to know how do you help teams and individuals confront the struggle? With these tools and these methods.
Well, actually, one of the things that you remind me of, Scott, is that when it caused me to think back on things. Like, I think there may have been similar dynamics going on earlier that I just didn't see. You know, it's just like, this is one of the valuable things. It was one of my early guys I reported to said to me, you know, Barry, develop a rich vocabulary of patterns. And as you know, I love what you and Joseph are doing with the sheet between us, because I do think that way, and I sketch things out, and I want to look at the relationships and connections, whether it be words or diagrams, but fundamentally it's about people, and us with ourselves and us with others is how do we connect, and again, in healthy ways and empowering ways that release the power we have within us. And so so that wasn't the exact question you asked, but that came to mind.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about what I'm doing with groups, I mean, storytelling to me is, there's a whole, I mean, it's something humans have done before we had written language. We're telling stories to each other. And it is one of the major ways of making meaning or making sense out of what's going on. And we are natural story-making people. Creatures, you know. So I will often, when I'm helping groups with story, I'll say, you know, we're hardwired for this. And again, Scott, you know the brain science behind it, but I'll say, you know, just last week I was talking to one of my kids about got your attention. Or I'll say, you know, one of the things I've really learned is, they're like, stop it. And I was like, you know, because our natural response is, well, what happens next? Well, what did you tell your kid about her? What did you know? It's like, you're driving me nuts, you know? So so stories to me is, whether it be a pair and share, whether it be a group thing, if we can create space for groups to be able to share stories. And actually, I think I may have popped a couple things up here. I can get into this for a minute.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm gonna stop the share and see if I can find. So I just want to illustrate this a little bit.
So as you're talking, Barry, I want to go back to the Evian Gordon's the four represent emotion. So it's really emotion, feeling, thinking, self-regulation. So those are the four. And so emotion is about the, you know, what I'm taking in, you know, what am I experiencing, and then it gets translated into feeling. So I'll send you some, and I'll actually post it to the podcast as well.
Great. And let me get to the share again.
I like this.
I went to Africa, to Tanzania about, I think it's been about 9 years now, with one of my mentors, Richard Leider. Richard is just an amazing soul. And I first read his book, The Power of Purpose, 25, 30 years ago. And I always wanted to go to Africa with him, because he takes groups, typically of men, to Tanzania once a year. And this is Palonjo, one of our guides. And in venture, I love the term, is what Richard calls his business. And as we were starting off, I think it was our first real day on the trail, they said, stay behind the rifle. I'm like, okay, wow, why do we have a rifle? And the purpose of this is really not to harm an animal, sometimes just to ward them off. And on the first day, we stayed behind the rifle, and part of it was just the territory we're in. There were elephant, and I think there may have been some lions or others that they were, you know, just wanted to be careful with. And the other guides were with Maasai warriors at the time. And as we went through there, again, just looking at this picture, to me, evokes a story. You're like, well, who's this person? What's the rifle for? We make assumptions about things like, oh, he must be out hunting or something. But that's really not what's going on. We're on safari, which is a key Swahili word for a walking expedition. And that walking expedition is not to hunt animals. There's some photo taking going on and some bird watching, but it's really a journey within. And it's the theme of this whole trip was to getting back to the rhythm. And I was on the younger side of the group. I just turned 50 and was with the other men I was with, really accomplished group, but just really wonderful. We got to be really close friends over the next 2.5 weeks. But a lot of it, we'd walk in silence. It would be quiet. And I found, in a sense of creating space, it was a really remarkable journey. And so when I'm working with groups, sometimes I'll start with a picture like this and just share it and just talk about, you know, our goal to, and ask them questions about, why do you think a group of 8 or 9 men would go into not the jungle, but into the bush and, explore? What do we think we're looking for? Do you need to go in the bush to do that? And get people chatting about trips they've been on or journeys, and then introduce to them that we're going to go on a journey here with your team today, or to, the next couple of days. And we want to, and here's the destination we have in mind, but the real important part here is the work that we do together. And some points it may be a little dangerous, or feel that way, or feel risky or scary. And being able to give people, in a sense, of vicarious experience that a story lends to, it helps people start to be more open. And I mean, say, well, I'm going to ask you to share some stories, etc. So that's something that, here's another one that this is, I've studied Aikido for a while. The idea of a beginner's mind, and having that when you get your black belt, you're considered a serious beginner. And I love that. To me, it's like, I've been working with groups for many years and have had some great mentors. I look at you, Scott, and I think your skills, but more importantly, your heart and your intention and your, you're just never done. I love that. No, it's so much fun to be with you. And work we've done together has been very rewarding. It's just because it's like, I don't know what's going to happen next, and it's fun. And there's this dynamic. And studying Aikido, I studied it because I was fascinated with the relational aspects of it. And it's this, the intention in it is to do no harm and not be harmed, but it's to be able to, and it's fun, it's flowing, it's difficult. You got to learn skill, you got to be safe, you got to be wise. And yet, as you get the skill developed, boy, can you move faster. And it's really, again, it's so much fun. And there's an activity called randori, where all the other people in the dojo attack you one right after another, and just really quickly. And you're usually practicing one technique of how to deal with that. And at first it's really stressful. You're kind of overloaded, like, oh, what do I do here? And then you start to remember your training, and your body takes over, and you breathe, and you start to smile. And it's like, this is an average day in the office, or this is an average day working with a group that doesn't want to move. And yet it's not about me. And you start to focus on other things. So I think about some of the work we do. And again, these are stories, but they're also visuals. And I find that helping get people out of their normal work relationships in place is good. And that can be in a conference room. You and I have talked about, the half-life of what's your line about the half-life
of a team building event is it's 5 minutes, 5 weeks.
Yeah.
It depends on the it goes back to the trust stuff. It depends on how much you're there. Yeah.
Exactly. But and yet there's such, again, I think back to this Africa experience frequently, and it's years ago, but the relationships that were formed there are very deep relationships. And as I've connected with it's like running into a friend you haven't seen in a long time, you pick right back up because of the trust account, or the connection. Well, actually, that brings up something. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was going to say, as you're saying, it's the shared experience, right? And so, and it's not just the shared experience, but the ability to talk about it afterwards. And I think I'm just curious to know how many teams, have a different experience. I always say, like, I don't know if it came from you but the idea of, you go to a meeting, you experience the meeting with other people in the meeting, you leave the meeting, start talking about the meeting with the same people in the meeting, to realize you went to the same different meeting because you're all trying to listen through a different, kind of a mindset. So, how do they make sense of their experiences together? And I don't think people are spending enough time doing that. So.
Well, and this is the timely week for it, with the Super Bowl coming up this Sunday, but it's this, the Super Bowl itself is, I don't know, the game itself 60 minutes like any other professional football game. Mm-hmm. But, the broadcast is like 4 hours with the halftime, the ads and everything else. But it's these 2 weeks leading up to it, from the conference championships. Until then, I'm seeing articles about, Andy Reid and, all the different players and all things going on. And then once the game is played, and whoever wins after the, whole day event it is, there's usually a week of people commenting on stuff, especially if there's any deflate gates or anything like that, or if they don't like the officiating. And so often, as you and I have both seen in organizations, is that many meetings are like that, where the meeting itself isn't that long, but it's all the energy that's going up, and, positioning, posturing, we're not really, you're going to say this or not say that. And then afterward, versus saying, how can we just be in the game, in the relationship with each other? And you reminded me of something, again, as I talk about the pool of principles, this idea of where we can go, you kind of examine these truths. The only thing that's kind of copyrightable is the expression of an idea, not the idea itself. You can't copyright a principle. And I'm sensitive to some of the stuff of the speed of trust that, Franklin Covey has the distribution rights to the training of that. Stephen M.R. and Greg Lang still own the IP itself, the intellectual property. But and so I've been working on ways that, well, if the client, I can't use speed of trust with them, beyond just maybe a model here or a concept, but, I don't want to infringe on Franklin Covey's rights for a lot of reasons. Part of them just integrity or ethical. But I've been playing with an idea of relationships. I'd love to just get your take on this,
Sure.
Of thinking about it. And it goes back to my early days at CompuServe, where we talk about bandwidth. And that's a term people use a lot these days, but it has to do with the size of your, the amount of data you can send over a wire or a line, whether it be fiber optic or a T1 phone line or whatever. And I don't even know all the technologies here. But I think about with, because often why are we getting a team together is that there's either not enough safety where people are sharing what they really think, what they really feel, creating together what's possible. In a sense, there's not enough space, or they have such differences about it, they can't come to agreement, can't really deeply listen to each other to see if we can create something better together. And I think about it, it's almost like in a relationship, there's a pipe that's this big and there's a problem that's this big, and they just can't get it through there. And it's how do you help create, first of all, establish a relationship, I don't know, maybe use a pen or something, but some kind of pipe. But then how do we widen it so that we can run a conflict through that? And we've got room to maneuver and to create. And I look at our relationship, and again, there have been times you and I haven't communicated much over maybe a year or something, but boy, it picks right back up. It's like we've built this pipe that we can do a lot of stuff through there. We can see it differently. We can share things. I can feel, like, oh, I can share whatever I think, whatever. Scott's not going to condemn me or whatever. And it's just, so anyway, I've been playing with that analogy of kind of how do you widen the pipe or create the bandwidth or something.
Well,
What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because as you're talking, in the stress stuff and the neuroscience stuff, we talk about how stress in any system is when demand exceeds capacity, right? And so what we're trying to do is build the capacity to meet the demands. I mean, the demands are just getting greater and greater. And that's why the whole collaboration work is so critical, is that you increase that, and there's dynamics that are, for example, trust grows capacity, so that people can actually step up to the demands, and through trust, they can actually open up more. And so as a result of that openness, the pipe gets bigger, So a big part of this is giving people in the skill set and the mindset around, and in the route of collaboration, the 5 practices is, it's, having the mindset to begin with, like going in there, Ethan Schutz talks about conscious co-creation, like what am I coming into this relationship with that I can add value to you, but also you're going to add value to me. And as a result of you and I working together, we're going to add value to our organization, our team, our community, what have you. And then there's the self-awareness. So again, it's noticing kind of that sense-making part that you have in space. Is recognizing, am I going in the red zone or green zone or pink zone? Or, we talk about the battleground, common ground, underground, similar framework. Self-accountability, again, the choices that I'm making, right? Then there's the openness. And again, that's the stuff that I've found, and it's really tied to the psychological safety of Edmondson's work, Amy Edmondson's work, and some of the stuff that Dan Radecki's done. And then the last one is the interest-based negotiation and problem solving. So I find a lot of times we jump to the problems as saying it's buries the problem, or the manage the problem versus, well, no, what's the dynamic that we need to tackle. So I think we do too much trying to solve the problem rather than let's just define it first and work together and what interest. And that's why I like the interest-based part of it too, because when people get stressed, they become self-interested, and then I'm looking out for wanting to protect me being significant, competent, or liked. And I'm going to behave in ways that support my self-interest. And if I don't have it clear enough, I think the way you describe it around the 3 questions is like, what are you focused on? And how are you relating it? Those are some key questions to say, wow, if we can create that shared outcome, then I can go from self-interest to shared interest. It's similar to the fresh biz game. If I'm playing to win or we collectively playing to win, and that shift is really critical, especially when you get into group flow stuff as well. So it's all kind of, at least in my mind, it makes sense. And so that's why I like that model you had would be a great tool for people to say, creates a space to get into flow. you know,
Mm-hmm.
and then be able to articulate, here's how I'm experiencing this meeting, or this is what's coming up for me, and give people the language to have the conversations. And that's what I love about some of the human element work, is that it's really about, you know, confronting. In fact, in the recent post that Joseph did with the sheet between us, we just talked about, you know, just being open and honest. And the reason why people aren't is, you know, not being sure if they can cope with the other person's response. So it's not that I don't want to say it. I do want to say it, but I don't know if Barry can handle my truth. It's just my truth.
Right.
So it's just information. It's just data. It's not a fact. It's just a perception. So.
Oh, that's really powerful, Scott. And just remind me of something else. And this is, I don't know if subtle is the right word, but it's just something I'm kind of noticing when I work with groups is, this goes back, I'm trying to remember, I think it's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or Heisenberg effect or something, that is a particle being observed, observing something changes its properties somehow. Again, I'm not explaining this very well. This may go way back to Leadership in the New Science, Meg Wheatley's book.
Yeah.
But I'm just noticing that when I'm in conversations with people, so I'm working, one of the benefits I have right now, a lot of my work's been episodic. I go in, fly somewhere, go work with a group, and then I'm out. I might work the client in terms of the organization, but not always with the same people. And over the last year, I've been working with a local client here in Utah as kind of their culture coach. And I've been coaching individual leaders, working with teams. I've helped them redo their values. I call that kind of like when they redid their values. And I said, you know, I feel like a midwife. This, you know, I didn't conceive the baby. I didn't bring it into the world. You know, I didn't give birth to it, but I got to kind of help. And that whole midwifing thing to me, and there wasn't a lot of screaming and stuff, thankfully, but it was, you know, it was just, it's an interesting thing. But I'm noticing almost what I would call presencing or something, that our role as facilitators, you know, the idea of, and the word probably comes from Latin, but in French, the word facile is easy, is how do you make things easy? It's just our presence, our way of being with people, invites things out of them. And I have people share stuff with me that, whether one-on-one or sometimes in groups, where you can tell they have this truth that they want to share or something, they're having a hard time expressing it. And just, I don't know, but they will express it differently when I'm in the room.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this as it relates to attraction. You know, one of the questions that I find, especially like if someone's complaining about somebody, right? I'm starting to ask the question is, do you like yourself in their presence, right? Or let's say you're really attracted to somebody. It's not really about them. It's just, what do you feel in their presence? And so, you know, I think one of the things we talk about in Speed of Trust is like, when you think about leaders in the past, is it what they did or how they make you feel? More importantly, it's how do they make them feel about yourself? Like, am I significant? Am I competent? Am I loved? You know, those are some really powerful social drivers. And a lot of times people don't recognize, this is why people need to really be thoughtful about, you know, again, if someone's getting defensive, it's because they don't want to feel something in your presence. It's not you, but something got triggered. So that's where, you know, for example, exploring, like, tell me what's coming up for you, you know, and it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just what they are. And to your point earlier about the mental health, I'm to the point now working in the flow stuff that I really believe that the neuro health is the precursor to our mental health, like really getting people to understand what's coming up for them. And then where it becomes more social is being able to articulate what it means, you know, putting words to it. It's a big skill set. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done more in this space. And especially as, again, the demands of our world continue to seem more and more complex. I posted on, there's a book that I'd love for you to get. I think I talked to you about it, but the future is faster than you think.
Yes.
I posted it on LinkedIn. I did a little post. There was a quote in there that I shared around just how the need to collaborate globally and to show empathy across cultures, countries, you know, is going to be really critical. Because again, if the demand's here, and individually I can't meet it, but I can meet it with you and an army of other people, that's why the collaboration. I mean, all we're going to get there is that we can come together and do it. And so models like you sharing, and I know you got a ton more, so we'll have to do this again because I want to be cognizant of time. But I'd just be curious to know, are there any, you know, any new books you're reading, any advice that you're living by that you're focusing on? Because I know for me, it goes back to that pool of principles. Is there one that you're kind of pulling from more consistently now that you're focusing on? And any advice that you'd give the group anything, just any other pearls of wisdom you have for us.
Oh, I don't know, Scott. I mean, I actually ran across a quote that something I found myself saying a lot that I hadn't said in a while. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's really true. It's kind of like your thing about don't
Talk, don't trust, don't feel.
don't,
Those are the three.
yeah, exactly. Don't talk. There, it's back.
Yeah.
But it's that, and this is more of a coach thing. But coaching. We probably talked about this before, but people will ask me, so what do you do? And I know what they're asking. What do you do professionally? And that's like I say, I bury people, and they go. They give me this weird look. I said, like, you're a mortician? I said, no, my name is Barry. And so I try to be Barry with them. So if it's one-on-one, we call it coaching. If it's one to a group of, I don't know, from 1 to 12 or something like that. And if it's a team, it's facilitating. If it's bigger than that, but less than 35, maybe it's training. Beyond that, maybe we're speaking. But it's like we want to box all this. But I say, for myself, I seek to just be Barry with them, just like you Scott people, Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I'm just trying to be, is just be true and not get hung up. Because again, I'll get hung up in role stuff myself, where it's like, oh, and my role is this, or my role is that. And there's expectations that go with roles. And it's important to understand roles. Roles are how organizations often make sense out of individuals. But being able to be, it goes back, and trust as well. So can I trust the person? Is a person in an organization moves in a more managerial or leadership or position, we would say, they'll, and as I coach or, bury them individually, it'll be like, well, why don't these people trust me? Or nothing's changed. I'm still the same person. I say, oh, you may be the same person, but this isn't about you. It's about your role. And
exactly.
They may have trusted you in the role you were in before, but now you're in this new role, or it's shifted the relationship. Now you have different, where you were a peer, now you're the person who's charged with being responsible to these people in a different way. And understanding those dynamics is important as well. And so I'm just looking at my role, and when I go in to facilitate and I sometimes think like, what am I here to do? I'm here to love these people. I just want to love them. Mm-hmm. I want to just be open. I want to be kind. And I can't do that if I'm all locked up myself. I'm not caring about myself or trying to be true, and just, be with people. So the quote that comes with that is that you already have, or you have access to, the wisdom you need to govern your work and your life very effectively. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the Michelangelo thing, is that, how do we get all the stone off that isn't you? And the same thing for their group, is that we are social. We are designed, whether you believe in higher power or through evolution, whatever, we're designed to collaborate, to be social beings. And to be human is to be in relationship, and to be in healthy relationships with ourselves and each other and the divine, if you believe in that. And having that, and that's what I'm trying to help people get to, and be there myself.
Are they open to it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'll use a spiritual term because it's the best way to express it. But again, it's the principle, and it goes back to St. Francis of Assisi, who said, preach the gospel always, use words only when necessary. Mm-hmm. When I left the company that I was at to join Franklin Covey, our CEO sent out a really nice email to the company, and people were, saying they're going to miss me, et cetera. And I was missing them. And I wanted to go on to the next thing, like you said, but it was also like, oh, there's some goodbyes and things. But one of the things that really struck me is people send me these personal emails, and many of the things they quoted to me, the lines they used, the things that they appreciated, were right out of my personal mission statement that I'd written for 7 Habits. And I've got some sort of personal credo or, code of honor, whatever you want to call it. And but people, it was like, literally, it's like, and it wasn't something I published or shared with people. Like, okay, we walked in your office. I remember that thing you had printed there, and I read it. It was, sometimes there were lines that I used a lot, words that were powerful to me, but many of them weren't. There were just things like going like, wow, I wonder how they picked that up. And it just reminded me that we are constantly sending, we're exuding, we are, again, hopefully being, we're picking up on that from each other. And that's goes back to just being true. I know you and I know you love cycling, and I love this term of truing a wheel. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that? Just because you're probably
Well, it's when your wheels are untrue, that means that they kind of wobble, right? And so you want to have a wheel that's true, which means the spokes are tight, and so the wheel is actually spinning, correctly. There's no bend to it. So it's like when you get your tires balanced, it's really a way of balancing the spin of the wheel, so you can actually go faster, further, and not crash. So.
And the same thing, whether it be a bike or a car,
right.
for a life, for a team,
right.
is how can we help true them and get rid of the noise and the things that are just unnecessary. It's the trust taxes, we can call them, but it's just what's getting in the way. Right. And I don't want to lock into what's getting in the way. I want to it's like, let's make that irrelevant. Let's focus on what's good and what's true. Right. And how do we help true ourselves up? And as a world, boy, are we untrue as a world right now. And my hope, and the work I think we do, and within the Collaborative Comments area, is very essential work. It's not just important, it is essential to, I don't know what the right word is, effective, successful. If we're going to move forward as humans on this planet, we've got to figure out, and I'm hopeful we will do that, but it's got to be together. And like I say, the demands are getting so great. But it's saying and part of it's focusing on, hey, don't buy into all the negative media and all the negative energy. Be aware of it, but don't lock in on it and go, how can we be true and help lead ourselves and all together?
Well, I think, one of the questions that I asked myself many years ago, I think I missed Sterling's first soccer game and I missed his first goal, and growing up, I didn't have a lot of involvement with people coming from my family to my events, my sporting events and stuff. And so I just didn't want to do that. And so I asked myself a question that I often ask to organizations, and that is, it's related to the word integrity, right? It's like, if I were to surrender, the integrity, to way dictionary definition, is to be whole and complete. So the question is, if I were to surrender to my integrity or that which makes me whole, how are they different? And at that point is to be home with my family, right? To coach. And I ended up coaching his baseball team and stuff like that. And so I asked that of teams, like, what's going to make this team more whole and complete? But in order to ask that question, they didn't know where they're going, And so if we're all pulling in our self-interest because we're all stressed out or we're all trying to get the promotion, it makes it a little bit harder to understand that, again, that shift between self-interest and shared interest is such a key component to that. So that's the work I think we're all trying to do within the Commons. And I totally appreciate your time, Barry. And I know that I'll circle back. We'll do a version 2. Maybe you can bury some people some more.
Here we go.
Because I always enjoy our time. In fact, I know that I do want to fly you out to LA or California, and we'll do a couple episodes of The Sheet between us. So I think you have a lot more models to share. I always think about that bridge to significance one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we have some other models that I think you could add some huge value to the community. So I'd like to get that on the calendar. But I'm going to wrap this up. Stay on the line. I'm going to hit the not stop recording, and then we'll do a couple final things here. Let me stop the recording. So thanks, Barry. Anything else to share with her? All right, buddy.
I just want to thanks for listening.
All right, yeah.
Thanks for your listening. True listening invites true speaking. So, Scott, thank you. Sure love and appreciate you.
Thank you, brother.